Welcome to Plain Talk, where we're going to be talking a little bit about what voters should care about and what they do care about. A simple reality of getting elected in a system like ours is that you don't get to govern if you don't get the votes. You have to win elections to govern. That's just the way it is. Is it the best system? No, it's got a lot of flaws. Is it better than the alternative? Yeah, because I can't think of a better way. It's not great. Although I heard somebody had a variation on that. I was watching something and somebody was like, they made this. It's like, so something about like life and being at work, and then both being better than the alternative. Like work's not fun, but it's better than the alternative. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. There's a lot going on in the world, and voters are voting in ways that sometimes don't make a lot of sense to me. And there's a reshuffling going on. A lot of the old coalitions that maybe a lot of us were familiar with growing up are not what they once were. Organized labor, not the reliable vote for Democrats that it once was. Even with certain minority groups, things like skin color, people are voting. It's a little weird right now. But one thing is definitely issues, like definitely what's motivating voters to bring them to the polls. And it's interesting because sometimes what motivates voters are not things that I don't think are important, but if they're important to voters, it kind of creates its own reality, right? Like that's the reality that we have to live with, that those are the voters we want. Anyway, that's a very confusing introduction, but I did write a column about this not long ago, and House Minority Leader Zach Ista, representative Democrat from Grand Forks, read it and wanted to come on. He had some thoughts about it. And he was going to come on with Chad Oban, but Chad's not here again today. So we have Kyler Cullum. He is a columnist and podcaster for the Decodin. You can find his work at mydecodin.com. He is filling in for Chad today. Zach, how you doing? Do we want to spend a little time ragging on Chad before?
I listed as one of my hobbies on my resume, but I'll spare him today. I understand Chad's at a funeral for one of the absolute best statesmen that North Dakota's had, Senator Larry Robinson, who served out of the Valley City area. We lost him last week. It's a big loss for the Democratic family in North Dakota, but also for the state. Right? You talk about a different era of politics, and I think he embodied that. You haven't seen a crossword spoken about him either before or after his passing. He was really one of the best, and hopefully we can get back to the type of politics that Senator Robinson practiced. So we send our sympathy to his family for sure.
I was kicking around writing a column that about Senator Robinson. My headline was going to be that it was proof that once upon a time Democrats could win elections in Valley City, and he did. He was a gentleman. He was in office, at the early part of my writing career, and was just a real gentleman. Was very nice. At a time too when I was just some punk blogger. And he didn't have to, spend any time talking to me. Probably could have safely ignored me, and he didn't. He was a good person and a gentleman. And you're right, a real loss for the state. Talking about
politician from a bygone era for sure, and it's unfortunate to see him gone.
For sure. Now talking a little bit about the topic, and I completely hashed setting the topic up, but essentially Democrats are trying to find the issue that engages with voters and that can get them to the critical mass of those voters, right? Because each party has a base that's just going to vote for them, hell or high water. And so each election cycle is about adding to that base enough to win the election, whether it's the presidency or a majority in Congress or a majority in the state legislature, what have you. And Democrats are really struggling to find that issue. And sometimes I look at your party, Zach, and I see you guys talking about things that just aren't that important to voters, regardless of whether or not they should be important to voters. It's just not where the voters at. And you obviously have a response to that.
I do, Rob. Let me start with where I think we agree. And you've absolutely identified job duty number one of any elected a leader in North Dakota or anywhere in the country, and that's to make everyday life a little bit easier for the everyday citizen. And I think as we sit here in fall of 2025, the number one way to do that is bring down this cost of living. People are just absolutely getting hammered, whether it's with rents and mortgages or groceries or utilities, you name it. That's the number one, pocketbook issue that speaks to voters. And you're right to call that out. Where I do have some disagreement with you is I think that's exactly what Democrats here in North Dakota and nationwide are talking about. We just had the Labor Day holiday, and our friend Senator Boucher of Fargo went to the Union Hall down there, and he gave an address to some union workers, and he wasn't there talking about how awful Trump is or some scandal in the news. He was saying, we're a state that can and should afford to pay for school lunches for every student in this state, right? It was, I gave a quote in a press release our state party put out for Labor Day, and I said, all North Dakotans want is for everyday life to be a little more affordable. Look back at the 2024 election cycle. Katrina Christensen, who ran as the Democrat for U.S. Senate, she literally hooked a video camera onto her shopping cart at the grocery store and talked about how that's the most important issue. So I think here in North Dakota, absolutely, that's what we are talking about. It's also what we do in the legislature. I looked, my colleagues and I introduced nearly 40 bills that touched on the economy just last session, but we see this nationwide too. There's not a whole lot of elections in an odd year like this one, but there's governor races in New Jersey and Virginia, and the candidates there, Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, the Democrats, they're talking about the rising cost of healthcare, the rising cost of groceries, the rising cost of electricity. So I think it's a message that is carrying through. I actually noticed this Sunday, it was kickoff for the NFL this Sunday, and there's a state senator running for office in Michigan by the name of Mallory McMorrin. I'm always partial to state legislators who aspire to higher office. And she had this great ad that said, you've made it all the way to Sunday. You've worked hard. You just want to enjoy football. But now you can't even do that without breaking the bank. And she talked about the $20 bag of chicken wings, the $5-6 bag of Doritos, the $15 six-pack of beer. And she connected that not just to the failed, policies out of Washington, but also just this failure of corporations to be attuned to what people want. She talked about how the Red Zone channel, right, the one where you can watch all the games and see all the scores, they added commercials for the first time. That's just an annoyance for viewers. And if you want to find your game, you might have to have a dozen different streaming services you subscribe to. So it's just kicking us when we're down at every turn. I think that is a message that both Democrats are talking about and should be talking about. And you're only going to hear more of it as we head to the elections in 2026.
No, that's a great point you make there, Zach. And one thing I want to kind of follow up with then is how do we start changing the just general public perception in the state of you guys getting that message out there like that then?
You're right. That's the challenge. I think a problem for Democrats in North Dakota and across the country is not what our message is. We haven't been great at getting it out in this modern environment. Every paid TV commercial you see or mailer that gets sent to house, it's going to be talking about those issues. But how do we, capture the public's attention in an era of social media and TikTok and YouTube? We got to come on shows like this one with you and Rob. Nationally, people are going on the podcast of Joe Rogan and those types. So we got to get through that media atmosphere. And it's sometimes uncomfortable for us, but we also got to make sure voters know who to blame if they're mad. Because right now, I think voters should care a lot less about what the message is from the Democratic Party that's out of power, and they should care a whole lot more about what the Republican Party that is in power is doing or failing to do, because that's what really matters on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you're in North Dakota, you're living under a Republican president, your lone representative in Congress is a Republican, your 2 U.S. senators are Republican, Republicans hold the majority in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, your governors are Republican, all your elected statewide officials are Republican, and Republicans have a supermajority in the state House and Senate. So if you're mad about any policy or any failure to enact a policy or any policy that hasn't gone away quickly enough, there's only one party that you should be mad at, and that's Republicans. We got to do a little bit better job of explaining that to voters too.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. Although I'm struggling a little bit. Is the problem that the message isn't getting out, or is the problem the message? And I agree with you. I saw that ad from the Michigan Democrat. I'm forgetting her name now. But it was good. I mean, that was pretty good. But like Katrina Christensen, hooking a camera on her grocery cart. I don't know how much she got. 33% of the vote last year. That clearly didn't resonate that much, or didn't resonate enough to overcome Senator Kramer's advantages or the voter loyalty to him. And I sometimes, so for instance, one big thing I know that the Democrats have been pushing so far this year And I kind of consider myself almost a gettable voter in a way. Like I've been trying, because I am very disillusioned with Republicans in the Trump era, as I think I have made clear in my public writings on this subject. To the point where
Rob Port's swing voter. This is the headline from today's podcast.
what a time to be alive. I mean, I was annoyed to the point where I voted for Kamala Harris. I don't like Kamala Harris. I don't think she would have been a very good president. But I was so sickened by Donald Trump, I voted for her just because I didn't want another 4 years of the guy. And obviously that didn't work out for us. But I feel like I'm somebody who's gettable. Like I'm somebody maybe representative of a type of voter who is conservative, but is disillusioned with Republicans and is maybe, if Democrats talk about the right issues, gettable. I went to the People's Town Hall that was put on by Trygve Hammer, Democratic-NPL here in Minot, thinking that maybe I was going to hear some things about that. And I didn't. It just felt like we're talking about the same old stuff in the same old ways. And I think there's a lot. I find myself getting very annoyed with Democrats because I feel like a lot of times it's very patronizing. I think a lot of times it's very lectury. And a lot of times too, we're very focused on issues that just I don't think are that important. Cultural issues. And Republicans too. We're focused on just dumb issues that matter to a mid, but because we all get whipped up about them by podcasters and influencers and cable news hosts. But I feel like Democrats kind of do the same thing. And on a lot of those cultural issues, they just end up on the wrong side. And it's not my place to tell Democrats how to overcome those things. But we mentioned it on the podcast a while ago where Mark Maron, who I think is a great podcaster, wonderful actor and comedian. I really enjoy him. But he made a crack in a recent stand-up special about how progressives had annoyed Americans into fascism. And I mean, it's a joke and it's hyperbole and it's over the top, but I felt like there's just a grain of truth in that, to where I feel like they have to come down out of the academic clouds. You have to come off the campus and start meeting North Dakota voters and American voters where they are. I just don't see that that's happening yet.
You know, what frustrates me about that analysis, Rob, is you called it out yourself. You're one of these gettable voters. And if it wasn't what Democrats are saying about economics, you have a different view of how the government should work with economics. You voted for a Democrat in the last presidential race because messages about how bad Donald Trump was resonated with you. So I think there's a bit of a market for that. You know, as I sometimes get frustrated, I feel like it's only Democrats that are supposed to control their message. Well, you know, if we're putting out relatively boring messages about how great Social Security is and how important healthcare is, bloggers aren't writing columns about that. Podcasters aren't you know, covering that. It doesn't get clicks. It doesn't get eyeballs. That's a challenge. We got to work on that. But the least message disciplined person in America is Donald Trump. He doesn't talk about the price of groceries. He photoshops himself into AI, you know, movie posters from the 70s.
But he does talk about it, though. I mean, he does talk about it. He did. He talks.
He did. Well, here's what he said about groceries. He said, on day one, we're going to bring prices down. It's day 233. Prices are only going up.
Oh, a lot of it's argle-bargle. I'm not, but he does talk about it.
I disagree. He does not at all focus on the things that matter to the American people. He cares about renaming the Department of War. He has spent more time talking about a made-up controversy about how one particular store is selling its blue jeans, and a made-up controversy about how one particular restaurant changed its logo than he ever does talking about how to make it so folks can afford new blue jeans or afford to go out to eat. I mean,
what if we're in a moment of time where that's the stuff that voters care about? That's what scares me a little bit.
I mean, it may be that some of the Donald Trump dead enders, that's what really works for them, but sometimes you have to practice the politics that you aspire to, not the politics of the moment. So, you know, Democrats can't back away from all of these important issues. Like, maybe it's a little bit on the nose. I'm literally sitting at my kitchen table as we talk, but this is where we have to focus on 2026. I mean, that's sort of stage two. Stage one is making sure voters know who it is that is not addressing these concerns, both in action and in how they talk about it. We got to do a better job of that as Democrats, and then we got to be here with solutions on the back end. Because I was thinking about, you know, it's been a minute since Democrats have held much power in the state of North Dakota, but if we had been in power these last 20 years, I promise you the minimum wage wouldn't be less than it costs to DoorDash in a Big Mac, right? I promise you wouldn't have to have families who choose between a paycheck and staying home with a sick loved one because we would have enacted paid family leave. And I promise nobody would have paid what you've called the back to school tax, that $100 or $200 you drop in your kid's school lunch account, because we would have adopted free school meals for everybody. So there is a real difference. We'll keep talking about it. Hopefully, you and others in the media help, take notice, I guess, when we do talk about it. But it's a real big challenge. We got to resist this sort of one weird trick thinking too, that just having one message is going to change things. We've got a long way back to rebuild some trust with voters in North Dakota and across the country.
So you mentioned 2026 as kind of being that stage two, and obviously nationally a successful 2026 would be taking back the Senate and or the House. But for you guys locally, what would a successful 2026 look like?
Look, I think locally, a successful 26 looks like fielding strong candidates for some of those statewide offices. We're going to have a strong candidate to hold Representative Fedorchuk accountable for a lot of her votes in Congress, particularly the one big, beautiful bill that's cutting healthcare, cutting food assistance for people. And we're going to have to field some really strong legislative candidates, particularly in districts where we have a real opportunity to pick up some seats. Grand Forks, Fargo, tribal communities across the state. And I think what's really important is, look, the numbers, they're tough for us. We're not going to necessarily win a lot of seats in rural North Dakota here in the next year, but we have to show up in those communities, let them know that there are Democrats in North Dakota. They don't all just live in downtown Fargo. They're in rural parts of the state as well. Sometimes we get a little too down on ourselves. It's not a great moment in the history of the North Dakota Democratic-NPL Party, but just last election, over 120,000 people voted for a Democrat for U.S. Senate. That's about 1 in 3 North Dakotans are willing to go into the ballot box and punch the ticket for a Democrat. So we're not alone out there. We got to make sure people know that. And then we got to, like you said, Kyler, we got to make sure we're telling them, here's what we would do if you give us a few more votes in the North Dakota House and North Dakota Senate.
It's yeah. I think to get there, because again, we're dealing a lot in cliches here. I mean, kitchen table issues. I hear that everybody talks about that every cycle. And they're nice ideas, and we agree on things like school lunches that we could get done. I think it's hard. I think it's hard for voters to trust the Democrats are going to stay focused on those issues. Particularly, and again, I suppose we're talking about the kind of the albatross around the neck that the national party or the perception of the national party is around the necks of local Democrats. But I'm just trying to struggle with ways in which, and I'm saying this like, not that I'm super excited about watching liberals win elections. I would like to see Republicans have to work a little harder for it. I would like to see North Dakota's Republicans be a little scared of losing an election now and then, so that they govern better and maybe forego some of their more extreme impulses. I think that would lead for a healthier state overall. But I look at, the focus on some issues that, I don't know. It feels like to me like it doesn't matter. I'm really struggling here because I'm trying to be fair. Like, I understand I'm putting you in a bad position, and this is it's really kind of a philosophical thing. But I don't know how Democrats overcome their own brand that they've created for themselves, or at least national.
Well, look, I think a challenge is that somewhere along the way a vacuum was created wherein we let the Republicans tell everybody what the Democrats' message is, and that message has no resemblance to what the actual Democrats' message is.
But let's be fair. If you work in the energy industry in North Dakota, I think you really struggle to see Barack Obama, the Biden-Harris, or excuse me, the Biden-Harris administration, the Obama-Biden administration is your friend.
I think if you're an oil lobbyist, you might struggle to find the friendships in those
but it's comments
administrations.
like that. And you don't think that the average oil worker is afraid of losing their jobs?
No, I don't think they're afraid of losing their jobs because they lived through the Biden administration. They lived through the Obama administration, and it was a period of boom for North Dakota's oil industry. I think this is the fear-mongering that the Republican Party puts out.
I mean, listen to the things they said. Barack Obama said on the record he wanted to put the coal industry out of business.
And well, then I guess he failed at that route. The
Yeah,
coal industry is thriving here in North
he
Dakota.
did. But is
And,
that the
and look at
sort of
North
thing that he's
Dakota
going to be?
Democrats. We're not going to the Capitol in Bismarck and demanding that we put the lock on the door of all the coal plants in North Dakota. We're fighting for a true all of the above strategy. If any party would really believe that rhetoric, we'd really hit the ground running with energy independence in North America. You know,
I understand that you think that those perceptions are unfair, and in some cases, I'm sure that absolutely been exaggerated by Republicans. I think there is some truth to them, though, and whether you like it or not, isn't that the perception you have to overcome?
well,
With
look, there's a saying that perception is reality. And I guess that is a challenge for Democrats to overcome. But I think this perception is vastly overstated, right? No Democrat is bringing bills to say what books you must read or must check out of the library. These culture war issues are completely driven by Republicans who see an electoral opportunity here. They know they can't run on their economic message because their solution to every problem is more tax cuts for billionaires. Voters don't agree with that, so they don't want to talk about it. So here's your next big culture war issue we're going to divide this country with. Democrats have been flat-footed on that, no doubt about it, especially at the national level. We got to be ready to respond. But I think to ignore that this is a Republican electoral strategy does miss part of the big picture.
And you make a good point with that. But even still, looking at just, again, that national perception is so entrenched in this local area. Like, even for better, for right or for wrong, even if maybe those oil workers we were talking about earlier shouldn't maybe be worried about losing a position under a Democratic administration, they still are. So it's just how are you guys going to, again, it goes back to that perception thing. How are you guys going to make sure that they really understand that, hey, if this administration does flip, your jobs are still secure?
It's like I said at the beginning, we have to go out to Williston and other parts of the Bakken and talk to these people, right? Well, they are exactly the type of people we say we are fighting for. We want them to be able to have a lower grocery bill when they go buy food for their family. We want them to have cheaper rents and mortgages. You're right. Number one, though, we have to convince them we're not coming to take your job away. I'm not coming to take your job away. There's absolutely no doubt that North Dakota base load fossil fuel based energy is an important part of the future here in North Dakota, and certainly an important part of the immediate needs across the country, right? We absolutely should invest in things like wind and solar and all these other emerging technologies. But, I think there's a huge opportunity for Democrats to be the party that says all of the above and mean it, right? We can support these traditional energy economies. We can support those workers, not only by making sure we're not coming for their jobs, but making sure that when they do take home a nice paycheck, it goes as far as they want it to, so they can achieve that version of the American dream they have for themselves. It's going to take a while to rebuild that trust, right? The branding is powerful. We talked about the great Senator Larry Robinson at the beginning. I'm pretty sure Larry Robinson could not change a single position he holds and go on the ballot in Valley City. If he had a D behind his name, he'd lose. If he had an R, he'd win. And that is a challenge. That's a challenge. Republicans in different states probably have that challenge in reverse. You mentioned it earlier, Rob. I think one of my Pollyanna hills I'll always die in is that every government is going to be better if that minority party has 30 or 40% a representation in it, because you're just going to be forced to make better decisions. There's going to be more voices at the table. Compromise isn't a dirty word, but we also have to show people that we have some fight in us too.
Well, that's a capitalist, right? Market forces, competition works. If you're the only restaurant in town, maybe you're not going to have the best prices, the best service. But if one opens up down the block, you're going to step your game up a little bit. And I think that's true in politics too. I think so much of you say, I'm not in Bismarck trying to take the oil industry away or something. But I think, if you're the average voter, you're probably paying a lot more attention to pop culture and celebrities and things and national politicians on cable news. And that's what's coloring the lens through which you're seeing both parties, really. I mean, maybe you're an MSNBC viewer, whatever. That's how we're looking at these things. And so, when you hear, I think one mistake that Democrats have made is being far too dependent on celebrity. I don't think we saw Kamala Harris coming down the end, and she had all these celebrities, endorsing her and everything. I think right now that hurts more than it helps.
Well,
Particularly.
Rob, I would challenge you to square that with the fact that our current president hosted a reality TV show called The Celebrity Apprentice, right? I
But
just sort of
the
kind of
the
reject that our
problem is,
problem is Taylor Swift likes Democrats.
right. But the problem is those celebrities, it's different, and it's different. Where we're talking about somebody like George Clooney versus Kid Rock. These are two very different people, and
Well,
I'm
one's an honest to God celebrity, the other has been washed up for years. I mean, there
sure.
is a difference
Our
between these two.
celebrities are better than your celebrities, and I don't like any of it. I really wish we could just keep the celebrities out of it. Like it or not, when a North Dakota voter is thinking about a Democrat, they're lumping you in with things that Leonardo DiCaprio may have said about the coal industry. I just think that's it. Like, you're tangled up in that, whether you want to be or not. That's the sort of perception net that you're stuck in. And I think that's where you got to get out of. You got to say, like, listen, I don't care what George Clooney or whatever. This is what Zach Ista says, or this is what Trigby Hammer says, or what have you. This is who we are. But I don't know how you disentangle yourselves in the eyes of the voters.
Or even to a little bit of a wider net too, not just to the celebrity aspect of it, but to people like Zoran Mamdani over in New York City, where a lot of people get some of those negative perceptions and then tie them back into you guys as well.
The fact is, what might work on a case. Let's start with this. If I was running in a Democratic primary in Brooklyn, I would lose. I would be far too conservative for the voters of Brooklyn.
I always joke that North Dakota Democrats in other states almost Republicans in a moderate. Right. I mean,
that's true, but to go back to the original point, one of the reasons a guy like that's running for mayor in New York sort of caught fire is he's talking about the high cost of rent in New York. He's talking about the high cost of groceries in a city like that. We could disagree on his solutions. I don't think we ought to own, state-run grocery stores. But, our last legislative session, supermajority Republicans, we invested $1 million in rural grocery support. That's an area where a very conservative Republican, Senator Myrdal, and a Democrat in good standing, Carla Hansen, came together and said, let's provide rural North Dakota with better access to fresh, healthy food. So we can quibble on what the policy solutions are, but I think he is a good example of having his finger on the pulse of what it is that's on voters' minds. So, we try to be as big of a tent as we can. I think sometimes Democrats pay a price for our most extreme members, our most vocal members, in a way that somehow the Donald Trump contingent doesn't, right? We could go blow for blow with some extreme Republican voices in Washington and the national scene. But
I hope
voters don't care about that.
If you look at the body of my work, I am not ignoring the extreme Republicans at all. I focus on them all the time. They drive me crazy. But on the flip side, I don't know. North Dakota are more tolerant of that sort of than they are of the other sort, and I think it really hurts you guys. But we are heading into a new election cycle. Any hints on who's going to be running for? Are we going to see Katrina and Trigby on the ballot again for Congress, or what? Any ideas on who's going to run for what?
I have played political pundit and horse race enough today. I don't have any news for you on who's going to be on the Democratic ballot. But to go back to where we started, I can tell you what our message is going to be. It's how do we bring down the cost of living for North Dakota, right? We opened the Grand Forks Herald this morning, got 2 separate articles about how food pantries are struggling to fill their shelves, how food insecurity is going up. We heard testimony in the legislature last week about 100. I think I wrote it down. 20,000 North Dakotans applied for emergency rent assistance. That's what we're going to be talking about on the election cycle. I know what voters care about. Rob, you've absolutely framed the challenges we have in getting that message through to people, disassociating ourselves from some misperceptions. But that's what we're going to be talking about between now and November of 2026 and beyond that, because it's going to be the types of bills we introduce in the legislature.
And by the way, another thing, a column, if you had read, and it went up just shortly before we did the interview, so you haven't seen it yet, but the Trump administration, it's been 51 days since our governor declared an emergency for the Enderlin tornadoes that killed, 3 people, significant amounts of damage. Our delegation just sent a letter saying that our state emergency funds are empty. We don't have enough. We need the federal government to engage. It's juxtaposed with an Associated Press report that delays in responding to those things. take forever. And I mean, I'm wondering, we're kind of living in a place where Donald Trump's even playing politics with something as fundamental. I mean, whether you like it or not, states from California to North Dakota are dependent on the federal government when it comes to emergency relief, and the president's been playing politics with it. I don't know if that's what's happening with the North Dakota relief, but it ain't showing up. In years, according to the Associated Press analysis, in years past, it would take an average of 2 weeks for one of those for a presidential administration to act on it. We're at 51 days, and overall, the Trump administration's average is at about a month. And I mean, to me, that speaks to inefficiency. And then some of the comments he's made where he's not going to give California emergency release until they implement voter ID laws. I like voter ID laws, but that's up to the people of California, and their emergency relief shouldn't hinge on that. So that's another thing that I think is worth pounding on, where we're
Absolutely
politicizing things that should not be politicizing.
Look, it's absolutely shameful. You have a lot of Republican politicians failing a lot of Republican voters. You know, I take the back roads home from Bismarck, and I drove through Page and Hunter and the Arthur area. I saw the damage that windstorm did, and I can also look at electoral map. I know there's a whole lot of Republican voters in that region. They expect Julie Fedorchuk and John Hoeven and Kevin Kramer to deliver, but those guys are just rubber stamps for Trump. I mean, do they know there's ways to influence a president beyond kissing his ass all the time? Like, withhold votes. Don't rubber stamp his policies until he authorizes disaster relief for North Dakota. It's just an absolute failure of any influence they might have.
Well, I don't know. I did think it was funny because in my column I picked up on something where Hoeven sent out randomly that Hoeven, who does not wade into controversy, the man is allergic to controversy, right? You read his press releases, and I mean, you go down his social media, it's a litany of important but not very sexy policy announcements. And then all of a sudden he's got this one praising Donald Trump for his deploying the National Guard in Washington, D.C. as this wonderful thing. And it was so out of character for him. I was scratching my head, like, what is he up to? He must want something for Trump. And a week later, along comes this thing. Oh, we haven't gotten our federal. Are those two things linked? Maybe they're not. I'm not inside John Hoeven's head. I don't know. But you're right. Flattering this president is how you get things from him. And maybe that's what they're doing. And what a terrible state of affairs that is. So anyway,
it's a very narrow margin in the U.S. Senate. Their votes, individual votes, have a whole lot of power. Like you had a column. We can stop playing games with clearly qualified folks like Nick Chase to be U.S. attorney in North Dakota, but they can also use their leverage of their vote on some Trump administration priorities and say, we're not going to play ball until those disaster funds come and help our farmers here in North Dakota.
Regardless if you're a Republican or Democrat in Congress, there is a point at which the Congress just needs to stand up to the executive branch. You know, much of this, I mean, the same dynamic exists in North Dakota, where sometimes the legislature just has to stick up for the legislature, and the executive branch has to stick up for the executive branch. And it shouldn't matter what party you're in; you're protecting the institutions. But everybody hates the institutions now. Nobody trusts them. Everybody hates them. That's where we're at. So, all right, we're going to end it there. Zach, thank you so much for your time.
Good. Kyla, good to be on with you. And I hope in the after action report you do rib Chad a little bit, even though he's gone for good reasons today.
Thanks, Zach. It was a pleasure.